And I don't like the usual suspects of golden book people like Richard Scarry. I like these guys who did more of the stylized things. Like this is Harry McNaught. Hold on. I'll bet that's Molly Leach. She's the only one who ever calls me. Look. Molly Leach. You would think she could walk over here. Lane Smith Studio.
Just one more book, please.
Okay.
Sometimes the idea comes from a drawing, and sometimes the story comes first. Right now I'm working on 3 or 4 book ideas at once, and they just come from different places.
You're even more famous than Mary Pope Osborne.
Did you get that on tape? Okay, ready? If this gets stuck in a tree, one of you monkeys have to climb up there and get it.
November 13th, 2008. Andrea Lucy Bela and I spent most of the day with author-illustrator Lane Smith. You know the guy. The true story of the 3 little pigs. John, Paul, George, and Ben. The ever-famous Stinky Cheese Man. Well, Lane showed us around his studio, introduced us to original artwork and his creative process, showcased 2 new books he's working on, and just generally inspired and entertained us. I'm Mark Blevis. On this edition of Just One More Book, Lane Smith Studios.
This is how I organize. In tiny type. 3 pigs and Stinky. So these are my 3 pigs and my Stinky paintings.
Oh yeah, look at that.
That's John, Paul, George, and Ben. Those are other kids' books. Glasses, who needs them?
You wrote it on there?
Yeah, just so I could kind of know what I'm trying to get. I guess I'll just grab a big handful of these and we'll look at them. How's that?
Oh, yeah.
There's a Stinky Cheese Man.
Oh. Whoa.
And originally when we did this book, we wanted the page, we thought they could actually tear each book, the corner, so that it looked like the Stinky Cheese Man had melted the book, but they said it would cost too much money. My work is so textural. Often people will see the original and they'll be disappointed because they'll think when they see the original it should be, you know, like cement, like thick texture popping out. But I achieve this texture by, as you said, I'm very neat, so I tape off the edges, clean up my workspace, and I just build up slowly layers. I would get a oil paint, yellow first, with a lot of turpentine to thin it down, and I'd wipe the whole surface down, and then I would spray it with this acrylic varnish spray, which is water-based, and the varnish and the oil base mix up and they cause these little bubbles to happen. And then I usually get out a blow dryer and I blow dry it and move it around, and then I do a red coat, same thing, then a blue coat, then a brown coat, then back to yellow, and eventually I build up all these little tiny dots, and they look kind of almost like one color, but if you look really, really close, you can see yellow, red, blue.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's, and then at some point I'll start going in and, you know, painting more detail like the bacon and things. Oh my goodness, here's the man himself. The Stinky Cheese Man. Yeah, and look, it's so smooth. Yeah. Look at that.
It almost looks like a print.
I know, so that's why people are disappointed. But instead of saying, my Lane, you're so neat, and look, everything's so perfect, it's just like, that's it? Are you sure that's not a printout from an inkjet printer? But nope, that's the original.
So even from the side, even though you have all those layers, makes between the white and the color, there's almost no difference.
I know, and that's probably 40 layers of glazes, just super thin. Crazy.
Do you think that book would have been as successful if it wasn't the combination of the 3 of you?
No, it would not. That's an easy question, immodestly. It was kind of it was just a perfect marriage, I think, because, and actually, true story of the 3 little pigs, when I first met John, he was working with a guy who had a real kind of cartoony style, and my style at the time was, you know, dark and textural and everything, and I think that kind of made that book, gave it a little more gravity, a little more weight, because if it had been illustrated in a real light cartoony style, it would have been a little too whimsical. But I think with the darker illustrations, it became more of a satire and a parody, but it still worked as a kid's book. And then when it came time to do Stinky, it was the same thing. We were big Monty Python fans, and we loved the idea of turning things upside down, and the paintings were dark, and Molly's design came from a magazine world, really sophisticated, and it just kind of caught lightning in a bottle. And I think that was probably our pinnacle. You know, some of the books after I haven't been that keen on, but like that one really holds up. So if I had the gumption someday, I'd do my website. I'd put the best and the rest, and I'd put my favorites. But I mean, obviously John Paul George Ben, Stinky Cheese, James and the Giant Peach, Diff and Do for Man and President. Those are definitely my favorites. A few years ago, it's probably been about 8 years, I did the poster for New Yorker's Book Country, and you have to do some sort of New York icon relating to books. So I had the Statue of Liberty sitting on buildings reading the carrot seed, and they got so mad because they thought it was advertising. They said, "Why are you having reading the carrot seed? Can't it just be an anonymous book?" And I said, "No, it's not advertising. Probably no one even knows about this book anymore. I think it should be at the top of everyone's list."
So is that supposed to be like the purple crayon?
Well, that's the same illustrator, Crockett Johnson, and yep, he liked to draw those herald. He was very consistent with his style, but that was his wife, Ruth Krauss, who wrote this, and she was of that same period as Margaret Wise Brown. But I much prefer Ruth Krauss's stories. But I just love it. It's just one of those. Don't listen to anybody. His mother says this. He plants the seeds, it won't come up. His father said it won't come up. His brother said it won't come up. And he pulls the weeds, and nothing came up, but nothing came up. And everyone said, you know, nothing's going to come up. And he waters it, and he's just persistent. And then in the end, the carrot came up just as the little boy had known it would. So it's kind of like, ha, 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 ha.
Did you love that payoff?
I do. It's trust your instincts and don't listen to anybody. This is, yes, encouraging young anarchists everywhere. Some of my favorite books are from the 40s and 50s, and so I wanted, for these books, for instance, I wanted to capture that look of early pre-separated art before people painted, and when they would go on press, and you would have a red plate, a blue plate, a yellow plate, and a black plate. And that's how I did this book, which is one of my favorites. Have you ever seen this one with the little baby? No. He says, and it's written, like I said, in the style, except he didn't mean it as funny. Monroe Leaf, he was very earnest, but you can see sort of similarities in the layouts. And this is from 1930s. But what I did see is I have things like, this is Baby Hocky, who's always very optimistic baby. Baby says, "I have a balloon. Do you have a balloon? I have a balloon. My balloon is red. If you had a balloon, what color would it be? My balloon is red." Pop! Oh. The baby says, "I have a string." "Do you have a string? I have a string." So there are little tells of little defeats, but then they always come out ahead. So I did this book, and then people kept writing me saying, "When are you going to do a sequel?" And I had lots of ideas for sequels, and I actually did the artwork on separate plates. You know, it's all black masks, like for her head, that would be a black plate in that shape, and then for the red, I'd have to do a black plate, and then I didn't even know what the book would look like until it came off the press, because they combined it all on the press. And then 10 years later, look, the ants took over. 10 years later, when Molly and I moved up here to Connecticut, I did the sequel, which was A Happy Hocky Family Moves to the Country.
Yeah, because you moved to the country.
Yeah, so it just seemed like a perfect opportunity. Look, this one's signed by the author, Lane Smith.
You signed it for yourself.
I guess so. And that was our very first house we lived in over down the street in Washington. And what's interesting about this book was they they could no longer, there were no presses that could do this old style technology anymore. It cost too much money. So I had to do this on the computer, but make it look like that. So it's kind of interesting that I got the same look, but with the most modern technology to get this 1940s, 50s look. Oh, well, okay, this is probably a good transitional piece because I used to always do, most of my work was collage, whether it's oil collage or whatever. Now, basically what I do is digital collage, but you could see this is a piece of paper, and that's, you know, things I cut out, and there's a little bit of that strobe pater I was just showing you, the guy with the long fingernails. So there's a little bit of make way for ducklings, so I drew it to look like a collage. A little bit of Madeline's hat. But and then these are pieces of paper I had to glue on there because Molly was later going to put her typography in these strips, which you can see if I grab the actual book, which is The Stinky Cheese Man. Again, the shiny cover. Let's see where. Oh, see? So then Molly added all the type and made it look like as if the giant had just cut up all of his kids' books to make his own story. So it was very calculated. Molly gave me exact dimensions, which is basically what she does now, only on the computer. I'll draw it up, scan it in, send it to her. She'll email back and say, make that piece half an inch smaller. But in the old days, we would just sit there with rulers and measure things. This was traditional collage, where I painted stuff, I cut it up, and I glued it down. Now, what I do is digital collage. So let's move over here, shall we, children? John Sheska wrote a story for McSweeney's, a book about kids' books or something. So I wanted to do a collage like this, but I wanted to do it in the computer so I didn't have to get glue all over my hands. So what I did was,
How do you get the glue off your screen?
I know, it's so hard. See, I did it on the computer, but it's the same thing. I scanned all this stuff in, but instead of gluing it down, I just picked up and moved it around like I would do this. Like, let's put it right here. And let's see, let's move this over here. And then when you decide, you kind of lock it in where you want. So it's basically the same thing. Alright, that looks just like your wife.
Oh, really?
Yeah, give it a shot. I was looking at the Alexander Calder. She lived in Roxbury. Get the scared reaction I was hoping for.
Do you enjoy the digital stuff more because it's more fun moving things around? Do you miss doing the actual tangible work with the materials?
Yeah, it's there are pros and cons like there is with anything. The computer is just a tool, kind of a toy too, like any other tool. But I love the control because when I'm doing a painting, obviously I'll get this all done and I think, I wonder what would happen if I splattered paint all over it. And then, oh, that was a terrible idea, I've ruined it. And you've just wasted your whole painting. But on Photoshop, you can go so far, and then you could try an experiment like that, and then you can go back and delete that layer if you don't like the way it looks.